against the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And of course, that's important because it was considered for weeks and months that that would be the only thing that would stop the Dakota Access Pipeline from being constructed near their land and possibly imperiling their access to clean water. That might not actually end up being the case, and so we have some good news, but first I want to read from that decision in which the tribe lost. U.S. District Judge James Boasberg's ruling said that this court does not lightly countenance any depredation of lands that hold significance to the Standing Rock Sioux, and that, given the federal government's history with the tribe, the court scrutinizes the permitting process here with particular care. Having done so, the court must nonetheless conclude that the tribe has not demonstrated that an injunction is warranted here. By the way, if you haven't been following this, it's a massive pipeline that would carry about 500,000 barrels of crude oil daily from North Dakota's oil fields through South Dakota and then connecting to another pipeline in Illinois. And in response to that ruling, one of the attorneys working this case says, "We will have to pursue our options with an appeal and hope that construction isn't completed while that appeal process is going forward. We will, however, continue to pursue vindication of the tribe's lawful rights, even if the pipeline is complete." So that seemed like bad news. It seemed like case over. Maybe there would be an appeal, but we know how that would probably go. However, suspiciously close to that decision being released, suddenly the Department of Justice, the Department of the Army, and the Department of the Interior have a joint statement ready to go where they effectively reverse the entire thing, at least as of right now. Portions say, "We appreciate the district court's opinion on the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers' compliance with the National Historic Preservation Act. However, important issues raised by the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe and other tribal nations and their members remain. Therefore, construction of the pipeline on Army Corps land bordering or under Lake Oahe will not go forward at this time. In the interim, while they're continuing to discuss this and look into it, we request that the pipeline company voluntarily pause all construction activity within 20 miles of that lake." And importantly, going forward, outside of just this one case, they said, "Furthermore, this case has highlighted the need for a serious discussion on whether there should be nationwide reform with respect to considering tribes' views on these types of infrastructure projects." And slightly later on in that same statement, they also said that the rights of activists need to be protected, and while we can't countenance any violence or destruction of property by activists, we also can't countenance any violence against those activists. We have evidence of that violence, and so hopefully there will be court cases in the future.
Yeah, so part of what the pipeline is saying is, look, this is almost all on private land. We already cleared it with the private land, so let's get on with it already. This is a $3.7 billion project, and if you continue to delay the financing costs, will endanger the entire project and cost us all this money, but also the area, the money, the jobs, et cetera, which is, so the judge is ruling with them. It is largely on private land. Okay. Now, what the Native Americans are saying is, well, yeah, except the government is involved where it's going under the water. And so, first of all, the water is sacred to us. Second of all, we don't think they did a proper analysis to see if there are sacred grounds by the water, and also on the private property. It might be private property, doesn't mean that there isn't sacred grounds on there, and so that's a different issue. And now the government is partly saying, yeah, maybe we should have looked into that a little bit better to see if the private property still has sacred ground. For example, the company started bulldozing this piece of property. That's what led to the altercation with the dogs and the protesters, et cetera. And so that's why the government's saying, okay, good point by the Native American groups protesting here. Let's check that out for a little bit. Now, they might check it out and go, no, we have decided that there are not sacred grounds there, and the water's the water. It's, so you think it's sacred, but we got to do a pipeline and we're going to go. So, but they haven't made that decision yet. So the part of the story I love is that this is the most American thing you can do, which is protest. And so they're doing that protest. It's gotten larger and larger. And it's having an effect. It made the government pause.
It worked.
Yeah.
It worked. I mean, it may not work long term, but it worked short term. And working short term is it's that money could go away, or they could decide, all right, we got to go a different route. We got to move forward. We got to move forward. We don't have time to wait and see what the government does. And if Trump wins, great, we'll plow it.
And by the way, according
big league into Native American heritage sites. No, but don't you also think, just really quickly, that this kind of also re-highlights identity politics in a certain way? Like, in some ways, these conversations devolve on Twitter and social media. It becomes all these debates about, like, are people being too PC and all this nonsense, and who really cares? But this is an issue that highlighted a specific group that obviously in American history has been a victim of like genocide, dislocation, and still routinely thievery of the land, still has their rights routinely violated. And then it was highlighted through an incredibly real issue, which is like literally water safety in addition to cultural heritage. And it fused together in a really important way and actually highlighted that stuff as like actual politics and actual things that matter.
Yeah. And look, we don't know where this will go. I think the odds that they could end up going forward with the construction are still very high, which is obviously not what the activists want. But as you were saying, I mean, look, this would not have happened, this temporary stoppage at the very least, if not for the protests that have been ongoing for months. And we've been covering this. We've done many videos. It is unfortunate that more of the most prominent politicians felt like they didn't need to say anything or there was too much risk in saying anything. We covered this week that Jill Stein did visit the site of the protests. And we've also criticized President Obama for not speaking out on this. Although I think we have to take back some of that criticism because they had the statement ready to go. Clearly, they were waiting to see what would happen with the court, because if the court did shut down construction, then there was no point in them saying anything earlier.
I think the Department of the Army, the Interior, the Justice might have checked with their boss.
They might have, yes. And so, look, this is him. They say that actions speak louder than words. Well, we didn't have the words, but we do have the actions at least now, and so that should count for something. There are going to be people
how he's usually criticized.
Exactly, and there are going to be some people who don't want to give any credit, especially when there are legitimate fears about what could end up happening a couple steps down the road. But this does count for something. He did not need to do this, and yet we have action.
And by the way, we've done a lot of videos on the Young Turks here, but even more on TYT politics. So Jordan's done a great job of covering this, and Eric has as well. So go to youtube.com/TYT politics to find out more about this. Lastly, look, we've talked about this on Old School, Ben. I root for the Native Americans. I rooted for them back in the cowboy and Indian movies, and I was like, I don't know why they're the bad guys. They seem to be getting murdered, right? So I never understood that. And so they've been screwed in 1,000 different ways, and all the treaties were, abdicated and et cetera. That doesn't mean they're going to win, and that doesn't mean that if I was a judge, I would necessarily rule in their direction, right? It might turn out that the judges and then now the government says, look, there isn't any specific burial grounds in where they're planning to do the pipeline. And so given balancing everything out, we're going to go forward with the pipeline onto the public land, and the rest is private land, and there's just nothing we could do about that unless there's a specific burial ground. So it might end up in that direction. But the other part of what they said in that letter that the government released, I really, really liked, which is, look, at a bare minimum, going forward, the next time we do this, we're going to check a hell of a lot better with Native Americans to make sure that we don't just go in and then at the end go, oops, we forgot to check with them again for the billionth time in a row. So even if they don't win on this issue,